Okay. I did want to give a few minutes to see if people would join, but the numbers are increasing quickly, so we can go ahead and start. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Leti Padilla. I'm actually the programs manager with NHPA or the National Hispanic Health Foundation. I also support NHPA. So if anyone here is part of the chapters and you receive emails after emails, it's probably me. So here's a face. And today we have the privilege of having Laura Kimble, who will be speaking to us about, well, acing the interview. And I'll actually let her introduce herself.
All right, thank you. And good evening and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us and for allowing me this time to spend with you this evening. So my name is Laura Kimble, and I am a senior talent acquisition partner with Walmart. I am a pharmacist by trade, and I've been with Walmart for about 25 years now. I practiced for 19 years as a pharmacist, and I was a market director for a few years, and then I have been in recruitment for almost 7 years now. I also have some amazing colleagues that are with me this evening that you will meet a little bit later during the Q&A portion, but thank you to Debbie, Emily, and AJ for joining me this evening as well. And so I know that some of you have some big interview days coming up, and really just kind of hoping to give you a few pointers and help you get prepped for those interviews, whether they're in a couple weeks or in a few months. There's always some good prepping that can be done. And I will be happy to take some questions at the end. So definitely be thinking through those as we're going through the presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So this is what we're going to cover this evening. First of all, we'll talk about the resumes, simply because you can't talk about interviewing without spending a little bit of time talking about the resumes, and give some tips on resumes that will hopefully be helpful for you. And also just preparing for that interview, the day of the interview, during the interview, and then some interview do's and don'ts. And so for some of you, some of these things are going to be common sense. And then for others, you might not be as comfortable with it. But I feel like no matter where you are on that spectrum, I feel like there's always that room to learn and room for improvement. And so I basically interview pharmacists and interns for a living. And so I've had that opportunity to sit on the other side of the table and to really kind of observe what works and what doesn't work. And then personally, in my own career journey, I've had some really good interviews, and then I have had some very rough interviews as well. And you may too, and that is okay. But I've learned from those experiences, and I try to become better, and then I try to use that information to help others along that journey. All right, so we're gonna kind of start with the basics and build from there. So this slide is kind of talking about what makes a good community pharmacist a great community pharmacist. So what do we really look for in a candidate that's applying to work for us? And although this is talking about community pharmacy, I feel like these tips just really apply to any pharmacy position, not just community. So we're looking for candidates that are friendly, are knowledgeable, genuinely invested in each patient. They're calm and collected. I think that one can be a tough one. A problem solver, a multitasker, and a team player. And, you know, sometimes during an interview, you might be asked something along the lines of, you know, if I were to observe you working in the pharmacy, what would I see? And so I'm not at all suggesting that you just use these answers, but I would suggest that you actually use your time as an intern to learn how to truly become these things, and just work with your mentors and your preceptors to grow in these areas. And I feel like some of them can really take some time and experience and observing your preceptors And then others might come a little bit more naturally for some of you. But these overall are just some of the things that we typically look for in a candidate. All right, so resumes. So this is very often your chance to make that great first impression. And so in some cases, a first impression, it might be face-to-face, maybe at a career fair or something like that. But if you're applying online, your resume really can make a big difference. And just to kind of put that into perspective, so in my job, I often get about 50 resumes a week. And I pretty quickly kind of put those into a yes pile, a no pile, or a maybe pile. So you want to make yours stand out. And again, to kind of hear from that employer perspective, how to get in that yes pile. And so first of all, I would say format. You know, candidates use a whole variety of different formats, and that is perfectly fine. I like the creativity that I see out there, but I think the main thing when, as far as format is, and I bring this one up because I see this a lot, is when you list your work experience, you should have your most recent experience at the top and then go backward, because we want to know what you've been doing recently and then work backward. Sometimes I see that flipped, and I think that's something important to point out with the format. And also having strong and clear objectives. So depending on whether you do a CV or a resume, you may or may not include an objective, and that's really okay. I personally don't have a preference whether somebody has that on there or not, but if you do have it on there, you want to put an objective on your resume that is, you know, it's consistent with your values and with your goals, and it's not something along the lines of, you know, I'm looking to be a pharmacist. Well, we know that. That's why you applied. So you know, make it a little bit more, you know, focus on what makes you special. Highlight your numbers. You know, have you made something in your past experience better? New initiatives, new programs. Just I would highlight that type of thing in your objective. And then avoiding spelling errors. You know, in today's high-tech world, most document programs have spell check, but you would be amazed at how many resumes that we receive that have spelling errors. And in some professions, maybe that's not a make or break thing, but as pharmacists, we need to be perfectionists. We are in a perfectionist profession. And so the details like that really matter, and that can get you put in the no pile. So be sure to go through that or have somebody else take a look at your resume and double check for any errors. Paper quality, you know, it's just nice to use a good quality paper. It could be, you know, off-white, light blue, something like that, kind of make it stand out if you're actually handing someone your resume. Of course, avoid wrinkles, tears, food stains, things like that. Seems like that should go without saying, but I only bring these things up because I've seen them. And then also, you know, something that I want to note here is to be sure that to note it on your resume if you are bilingual. I'm amazed at how many people don't think to list that on their resume. And it's so powerful and is a skill set that's not taught in the workplace. And it really, you know, it makes you able to communicate with a population in that community that might struggle with medication comprehension or adherence. And you have the skill that makes you stand out above other candidates. So be sure to share that information and put that on your resume. So then, you know, despite the importance of your resume or your CV, the interview is really the most important part in winning a job or an internship. But you need a great resume to get to that interview stage. So one other thing that I did not bring up here that might be worth mentioning is when to use a cover letter. So I feel like a cover letter is especially important if you need to explain something that could be seen as a red flag to the employer. So for example, if you live in one state and you're applying for a position in another state, you want to use that letter to explain your situation and explain, you know, are you already licensed in that state that you're applying for? When are you moving? Do you already have a date lined up? Otherwise, you might not be considered because the employer might think that that you're desperate and just applying to any open positions. Also, I think about, if you have gaps in work history, use that cover letter as an opportunity to explain. I mean, maybe you were touring Europe or caring for a sick loved one. Just, those things happen in life, and we understand that those things happen. Just explain yourself. Don't give the employer any reason to think that that there's a reason to put you in the no pile. All right, so some tips for interview preparation. So the first one is a big one. So start early. So I would say it is never too early to start preparing for interviews. I would actually recommend creating a file for yourself, just on your laptop. Just anytime you accomplish something that is significant in your career, or maybe even just in your personal growth, make a note of it in your file. And if you're anything like me, you probably won't remember all of those little things later, when you're under pressure, you're trying to prepare last minute for an interview and you can't think of those things that you've done. So I call my file Laura's landmarks. I've also heard smile file. I like that. So it's just nice to be able to easily refer back to that file so that you can come up with some ideas for interview topics and really hit those high points. Also, establish employment criteria. Learn what a company is looking for and what you can offer to them. It's always good to pick 3 things that you want to highlight during the interview. So things about yourself or things about the company that, if the question isn't asked during an interview, but you really want to point out these few things about yourself and kind of work them in during an interview. Also, do your homework and know why you would want to work for that company. Most likely you are going to be asked that question. I don't know that I've ever gone into an interview and not asked that question. Why are you interviewing? Why are you interested in Walmart? And so it's so good to do your homework. And then that goes into the next one, which is keep up with current events and know a little bit about the company. Do some research and ask around about the company. Just see if, for example, at Walmart, we have the discounted drug lists. We do MTMs. We're focusing on clinical services. So that information is going to come in handy during your interview. And honestly, it really impresses the interviewer if you know some of those details about their companies or their initiatives that are important in the company at that time. Questions for the interviewer. We are going to focus on that one a little bit later. Then also a confirmation email. We always say that consistency breeds trust. Kind of be in our face in a positive way. It helps a company to remember you. It's respectful. It confirms that you have the correct time, date, location for the interview, that you're looking forward to it. And then something that's a little bit newer for us, but very important, I have found, is if the interview is virtual, be sure that you understand how to use that platform. Test it out in advance, and not like 15 minutes in advance, but probably a few days in advance, so that if you're having any issues, that you've got the time to work through those. And then practice, practice, practice. So some of the best advice that I ever got about interviewing is to practice out loud. It allows you to kind of notice where you stumble, how many times you say and it's really a good idea to come up with some questions and maybe have a friend, a roommate, family member, go through a mock interview with you, just so you can kind of practice getting those thoughts out into sentences. And I would say here that it's good, and I think it's okay to rehearse your answers and to think through things. But be sure that you listen to the actual question during the interview, and that you're not kind of over preparing an answer. You need to be sure to answer the question that's asked during the interview. And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more in the future as well. All right, so let's talk through a few different types of interviews. So it pretty much boils down to two basic types of interviews that you should be prepared for. So there are structured interviews where you're asked a basic question and then you answer the question. So just for example, they might ask, why did you decide to go into this field? Or, what made you apply to this position? When would you be able to relocate? Those are kind of simple questions that you just answer. But then there are also the behavioral or situational based interview questions. And prior to my current role, those are the ones that I found to be very tricky. So with this type of question, you're being asked to reflect on your past experiences and to tell a story. So it's not so much about what would you do in a certain type of situation, but more of a what did you do or what have you done type of question. And so the question might start off with a phrase that is, tell me about a time when. So we're going to look at some of the models that will help you structure an answer for that type of question. All right, so the first model is the STAR method. And this one I wouldn't probably write down or take a whole lot of notes on this because this model is actually a little bit outdated, but I wanted to mention it in case you're familiar with the STAR method so that you can see how we've kind of evolved this method into an even better method. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So first is the situation. You want to just kind of describe the specific situation that you were in. So kind of set the scene of the story. And then the task is, what did you need to accomplish? What goals were you working toward? And then the action is to describe the actions that you took. Something that's important to note here is that you want to focus on the word I versus we. And I think it's really important to show that you can be part of a team and to give team credit, but you're in an interview for you. And so we need to hear what you did. And then the results are, what did you accomplish? What were the results? So next is the SHARE model, which is the newer method that I mentioned. And so with the SHARE model, it stands for situation, hindrance, action, results, and evaluate. So again, that situation is you're setting the scene, getting things set up for your story. Then they added in hindrance here. So you want to outline the challenges that you faced. And I think that's really important to point out, what were the struggles that you were dealing with? And then the action, again, you want to describe what actions you took, focusing on what you did. The results, focusing on what did you accomplish, outline the positive results that came about. And then evaluate. So you want to evaluate what you gained from the experience. And what's really important is to focus on how it can be applied to this company that you're applying to or to this project that you're working on. And even in hindsight, what might you do differently? So the STAR and the SHARE models are very similar, as you can see, but the SHARE model it's really just a little bit more in depth and it's more reflective. And so the SHARE model is usually preferred because it gives you the opportunity to tell us more about what you learned and how you would take that information to succeed in this new role that you're applying for. So with either model, you want to be sure that you're using numbers and data to show your results and to show objective data as to why you're the best candidate for this position. So as I kind of mentioned here or previously, is that something you want to keep in mind is that these interview prep guidelines, they're just that, they're guidelines. So they can be really helpful in guiding your story, but just don't get so set in your ways that you're forcing it. Some questions are actually just simple questions with simple answers. So for example, not that you would be asked this question, clearly this is an exaggerated example, but if somebody would ask you in an interview, what's your favorite color? It's probably not a great idea to use the share model here, to explain, the situation by telling them about a time when you were hiking and you saw the blue sky and the green mountains and the hindrance that you faced with, that's not the time for using the share model. And unfortunately, I speak from experience on this one. I have been in interviews where I was asked a very basic structured question and I forced a behavioral answer because I got it in my head that they were looking for behavioral type answers, and it didn't go well. And so I encourage you to learn from my mistakes on that. And my point here is really just to be prepared, but you've got to adjust to the questions that you're asked. And so when you're preparing your thoughts in advance, it can be really helpful, I have found, to create bullet points maybe instead of memorizing full sentences and full stories. Just kind of use those bullet points that will allow you some flexibility so that if you're asked a question a little bit differently than you're expecting, that you can still use your bullet points as a guideline and then just adjust so that you are actually answering the question. My other takeaway here is just to share that you're not always going to get it right. Some interviews just won't be your best, and it's okay. Don't beat yourself up over it. Just learn from it and find a way to do better next time. Just don't give up on interviewing or on taking chances. And in that example that I gave to you earlier, that I didn't get that job, but I got the next one, which was a completely different job, but has been one of the best jobs that I've ever had, which happens to be my current role. Sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. All right, so moving on to some pointers for the big day, the interview day. So an interview starts as soon as you walk in. So even for a career fair, the interview, it doesn't start during your interview time slot. It starts as soon as you walk up to that employer's table or to the receptionist desk at an office. So, you want to be sure that you are dressed professionally. And we encourage you to still be you, but just make it a professional version of yourself. And then give yourself plenty of time to be on time. For me, I know nothing makes me start off worse than that anxiety of being late and starting off on the wrong foot. So just give yourself plenty of time. Review that homework that you did and review those 3 things that you want to highlight. So you've got those fresh in your mind. Print out a nice fresh copy of your resume. Take some deep breaths and relax. You are ready for this. Show your personality and prove why you're the best person for that job. All right, so during the interview, first of all, I would say just remember to breathe. And really, most people get nervous during an interview. I think that's very natural. And really, let's face it, it is a situation where you are being judged, and most of us are not crazy about being in that type of situation. As interviewers, we get that, we understand the nerves, so don't let that rattle you, just take a deep breath. I know that sometimes when I am in a situation that I am nervous, I just try to take some breaths and then I count backwards from 10, just to kind of make my mind focus on that counting. And then just, remember that firm handshake. You want to make eye contact. You don't need to be creepy about it, but you don't have to stare them down, but you do want to have that professional eye contact. Listen to each question before speaking. And take a moment to think if necessary. That is absolutely fine. And again, interviewers, We don't expect you to have an answer right off the top of your head to answer within 3 seconds. It is fine if you take a moment to think through and kind of create the answer in your mind and then speak. So I know that when you're being interviewed, that few moments feels like forever, but it's okay to do that. And ensure that you answer all parts of the question. Sometimes you'll be asked kind of a multiple part question. Show your personality, and again, just remember to prove why you're the best candidate. I like to touch on the phone and the virtual interviews. So oftentimes a first interview is going to be by phone, and at least at Walmart, we typically call that a pre-screen interview. And that can be your chance to make that great impression. And for some, what I've noticed is that's harder to do by phone than it is in person. And I feel like, with all of the texting and the Snapchatting that we do now, that sometimes we forget the basics of a phone conversation. And, I will say that I am astounded by the one-sided conversation that I hear when my 18-year-old son is on the phone. And clearly he does a lot of texting and Snapchatting and not phone conversations. So we still have some work to do there. Because the interview can't see you, how you verbally communicate makes all the difference. So again, with that phone interview, you want to listen to each question, take a moment to think if necessary, speak clearly and audibly. I think that's always important, but even more important by phone. Be sure that you're in a quiet location. Try to be free from pets and overhead speakers. And then that virtual background, make sure, just, be aware of your background if it is a virtual interview. So just think about what people are seeing behind you, and, is it distracting? Is it professional? Something to keep in mind there. And again, I mention that because you would be amazed at how people come on to a virtual call. And then thanking the interviewer. I think that is something that, when you're in person and you stand up, you shake someone's hand and say thank you. But on the phone, sometimes people seem to struggle with that, ending the conversation. So just thank them, just like you would in person. All right, so some interview questions. So the interview questions will typically be based around 4 different topics. So you want to be prepared to answer questions in each of these categories. So the first one is your career goals, kind of what are your short-term and long-term career goals. And oftentimes, you'll be asked, where do you see yourself with the company in 5 years or in 10 years, something like that. And I think that it's important to see yourself as an investment for that company. And it's good to consider future roles with that company. Then also your work experience. Just be prepared to be asked about your work experience from your resume. And if you don't have that work experience, be sure to be able to talk about your shadowing or your volunteer work, your rotations, even sports, working as a team, or tell me about a project or a challenge and that you have faced, maybe even during school, and what was the outcome of that. Also your skills, what makes you different, your leadership skills, maybe even your hobbies. I would focus on work whenever you can, on work experience, but if you don't have that work experience to reflect on, then it's okay to talk about some other things that aren't work related. And then also those situational type topics. So, tell me about a time when, maybe that you've dealt with a team member that was not motivated. If you had to deal with conflict in the workplace, or times of high stress, or an angry patient. If you've worked in a pharmacy, surely you have some sort of story about a particular patient that was maybe difficult to deal with. And just be sure to show your personality. If you have volunteer work, sports, church groups, hobbies, just, you know, it's good to show that you have outside interests, and companies are looking for well-rounded candidates. All right, so interviewing mistakes, kind of just the opposite of everything that we just talked about. So arriving late, dressing informally, poor eye contact, asking self-serving questions. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Lack of knowledge about the company, and failing to address the question that was asked. All right, so at this point, I would love to have 3 volunteers that are willing to just kind of be put on the spot and willing to take just a little bit of constructive feedback. It will be nice, but if we have some folks that would be willing to unmute and just say your name, and we'll throw a couple of questions out there, and I'll help guide you through the questions if we need to as well. And I can't see everybody since I'm sharing my screen. So if somebody wants to unmute and just say, I can volunteer, that will help me. And Letty, I don't know if, oh, gotcha. Is somebody unmuting there?
No. I was going to say, or someone can just raise their hand if that's easier, but nope, I don't see anyone.
Okay, and I cannot see any of the participants on my end. Oh, I see somebody is, oh, it says their audio is disabled.
Let me go ahead and look at that.
Thank you for letting us know that. Give us just a moment. And Letty, just let me know if that's not something that we're able to correct, then I can just throw a few examples out there. But if we can correct that, then great.
Yeah, I think that'll be good for right now, just as I check something.
Okay, very good. And actually, do you want me to just skip forward and come back to the questions? Okay,
yes.
Okay, we'll do that. And I'll even, you know what, for fun, I'll give you guys a quick glance at the questions, and then we'll come back to these. So why did you select pharmacy as your career of choice? And then give me a solid example of how you've shown successful leadership in a group setting, whether that's at school, work, or on rotations. And then tell me about a time when you failed a project or an assignment at work, and how did you respond, and what did you learn from that? I'll give you all a moment to think on those, and then we'll come back to those. But then this last one is, and this one we don't really need a volunteer, but I think it's always good to be prepared for this type of question, which is, you know, why are you the best person for this position? You really need to be able to answer that question without hesitation, because again, I think that's one that you're almost always going to be asked. So just be prepared for that type of question. All right, so just a recap on what impresses the interviewer is enthusiasm, those communication skills, some self-confidence, being well-dressed and prepared for that interview, showing your abilities and showing what you have to offer. All right, so at the conclusion of the interview, I mentioned that we would come back to this. So you want to prepare some questions for the potential employer. So, some things that you could use are, what are some strengths that the ideal candidate should have? Or maybe something along the lines of, how is an employee performance measured? But a big mistake, I highly encourage that you avoid questions about salary and to allow the interviewer to discuss that at the appropriate time. I think this is a really common mistake. And if you're offered the position, the subject of salary will come up. But just only being concerned about the salary just kind of lowers your stock in the interview. And, after learning the salary, you may not be interested. But worst case scenario, you just got a little bit of extra practice in interviewing. And maybe that will help you land the next job that you really want. But just I would avoid asking those questions. You can also ask about the next step in the process. I think that's important. If they haven't covered that, feel free to ask that question. And just be sure to end on a positive note. At the end of the interview, or at the end of the interview, just be sure to thank the interviewer for their time and tell them, if it sounds interesting to you, and tell them why you think you're the best person for that position if they haven't already asked that question. And then again, just following up with an email and thanking the interviewer for their time and their consideration. I think that, letting them know that after learning more about the position that you are interested, I think that is a great way to end on a positive note. Letty, any luck yet?
Yeah, sorry. So I just messaged you. Since you're the host, you have that option to do that, and I can't do it on my end.
And I was even looking at that, but do you know what I will click on? Don't see that it's an option for me. Let me stop sharing real quick and see. Yeah, it's not giving me that option anywhere. Okay, well, let me go back to sharing my screen. And we will, I apologize because that's going to be me just chatting for a minute, talking through some of these, but that's okay. Okay, so this first question, this one is going to be that structured type question where you just answer this question as you see fit. This one is really just more of your personal story on why you joined the healthcare profession. So that one's pretty straightforward. The point of this one is really that it's a structural question. It's not a behavior-based question, at least not typically does somebody make this one a behavior-based question. So just really telling your story and having a reason why you went into the profession might be good to prepare for. Then this question of, give me a solid example of how you've shown successful leadership in a group setting, whether that's at school, at work, or on rotations. So with this one, again, I think this one is about showing leadership and focus on that leadership and go through that share model, set the situation, set the scene, let us know what struggles you had. And then also what actions that you took. I think that's where this one is really important because the question is talking about a group setting. And so it tends to lead you down a path of talking about your team and what your team accomplished, what the results were. And that's great, but you do want to be able to pull out of that storytelling of what you did to make sure that you accomplished the results. And I think it's really important that you still give the team credit and that you show yourself as a team player. As you may remember, I think it was back on like slide 2, we talked about one of the things that we look for in a candidate is being a team player. So we're not looking for somebody who wants all of the credit, but to show that you can be a leader in that situation and also be a team player. So that's kind of what we try to pull out in that type of question. So this next question, I really like to have the audience involvement on this question, because this one can go in a lot of different directions, and I hear a lot of interesting examples on this one. So, you know, tell me about a time when you failed a project or an assignment at work, and how did you respond and what did you learn? And so I think that this one is so important to prepare for, because this one, your answer can go poorly if you don't have a prepared answer for this. So what I have found, for example, in one of the groups that I threw this question out there, the student, she did a great job of answering the question, but it actually gave a perfect example of why to prepare for this. So she talked about how she has kids at home and that she failed at coming to work on time, and that was an issue for her, and that she had to sit down with her team and come up with a way that, you know, she could that she could work through it. And in the end, she did kind of have some examples of how she had worked through it. But what that told me was that in her past, you know, that she has had, say, some childcare issues, and she has had issues at getting to work on time. That was the big thing. That you know, I think it's so important to not use an answer that you really don't want to bring up during an interview. So she just kind of made herself look bad by answering the question that way and saying that she couldn't make it to work on time. And so just come up with an example that you're like, okay, here's something that I failed at, but I turned it around and we ended up, you know, having a great outcome. And here's what I did to get there. And here's what I learned from it. So I think this one is, it's less about failure and it's more about growth. And sorry, I see that the screen just did something weird there. But so anyway, yeah, it's so much about growth. So it's okay to point out that you failed at something. That's what we're asking for. And sometimes people are hesitant to discuss that. But it's not about the failure, it's about the growth and what you learned and what you would do moving forward and how you overcame that. All right. I'm going to skip ahead. All right. So with this slide, just basically, I would love to connect with you all. If you could use your phones and scan the QR code and just fill out these couple of questions that we have. It takes probably 1 minute or so to fill this out, and I promise I will not use this information to stalk you. It just helps us to stay connected with you. And I will follow up with an email just giving you my contact information so that if I can ever help you in the future, I will be happy to do that. It does not have to be an interview with Walmart. It's, you know, we're all in this profession together, and I'm here to help you along that career journey. So just, you know, send me an email and we can talk through some interview prep if you would like to do that. I can look at your resume and do a resume review if that is helpful to you as well.
Laura, I don't see anything being shared on the screen.
Oh, thank you. Let's see here.
Now I see the QR.
Is that okay? Perfect. Thank you for letting me know that. So yeah, the QR code is there. And then really just want to thank you all again for your time this evening and for allowing me to present. And I hope that this information helps you in your future as interns and as pharmacists. And of course, if you are ever interested in opportunities at Walmart, we would love to hear from you, and I can put you in touch with hiring managers in your area. But just wish you all the best. Hope that you have a great year, and we want to open it up to any questions that you might have. Again, I've got some market directors and a regional director on the call that we have all different perspectives on this. So want to give you a moment to ask questions. Letty, do you know if we're at a point that they can unmute themselves now?
They should be able to now. Yes, I've given them permission.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
While we wait, maybe Debbie and AJ and myself can just introduce ourselves. So my name is Emily Medina. I am a Market Health and Wellness Director for Walmart. I have been with the company for about 8 years. I started as an intern in pharmacy school. I went to the University of Florida. And then after graduation, I became a staff pharmacist and then a pharmacy manager. And I have been in this current role for about 1.5 years, and I'm really enjoying it. I oversee 13 pharmacies in the northeast part of Florida, and my contact information is on the screen if anybody has any questions. AJ, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those in the East Coast. I'm actually in Pacific Standard Time. It's about 5 o'clock, almost 5 here. I'm a market director for Market 481 that is based in LA. Actually, 14 stores run up from Los Angeles to Bakersfield to Santa Maria. It's about 3-hour drive up north to the middle of the state. Been with Walmart going my 13th year. Started as an intern. Was a staff intern, staff pharmacist, pharmacy manager down in South Florida, Miami area. Moved out to Denver for a pharmacy clinical services manager, and then been in a market director role for about now 5 months. So, great. I've been on both ends on the interview a lot. So a lot of experience. Anyone that's on the West Coast, my contact information is on there. I do have intern positions open as well throughout, Central to Southern California. So feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, AJ. And then Laura, I'm doing everything that you said not to do in a Zoom interview. Actually, they're making a PA right now, but sorry, I'm at the airport. So sorry that there's a little bit of background noise. I try to put a Zoom background to cover what's behind me. But hey, so I'm Debbie Pereles. I've been with Walmart for 21 years. I was hired as a pharmacy manager. I did that role for 5 years. Then I was able to go back home. My home is Puerto Rico. So I was able to work there as a district manager for 4 years. Then moved to South Florida, where I've been for the last 12 years. I was a market director, and then I've been a regional. It's going to be 3 years now. And, AJ was an intern for me, and then he was a pharmacy manager for me. Emily was a pharmacy manager for me, and now a market director. So for me, really, it's everything kind of coming, full circle, right? On seeing what they're doing right now and how both of them started as interns with the company, right? I just been 21 years with the company, but I wish that I have joined while I was an intern, right? So I guess I miss on that. But my information, it's also there. Region 72, is the Southeast. So I supervise 188 neighborhood markets in the Southeast. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, AJ, Debbie. Thanks for being here this evening. And absolutely, we want to open it up to any questions. If anybody has any questions, thoughts, even if you were prepared to answer one of those questions and now you can unmute and want to do that. All right, and if everybody's being shy, that's okay. Just be sure to submit the information on that QR code and I will follow up with you. And then feel free to just reach out to me. I can get you in touch with any one of my peers on this call, and we will always be happy to help you out any way that we can through your career journey and throughout school. So again, just thank you, everyone. And I will stay on in case there's somebody who wants to ask a question. Feel free to jump off of mute. But otherwise, just hope you all have a great evening and wish you all the best. Thanks for being here.